Hello and welcome again to Conscious TV. I'm Iain McNay and today our guest is Bronwen Astor. Hi Bronwen.
Hello.
And Bronwen really has a fascinating life. There's been a book written about her by Peter Sanford, which you can still find. It's not so easy, but you can still get it. And she, these days, is a spiritual director, has been a psychotherapist, and she's also Lady Astor, and has really had a very challenging time several times in her life. But we're going to start, Bronwen, with your first experience, your spiritual experience, when you were, I think, 7 years old, when something quite strong happened. Just talk us through that.
Yes, I went to a party to a friend of mine who was very well off and lived in the fairly rich part of Hampstead, and had a wonderful house and garden, such as I'd never seen before, and we were playing hide and seek. And at one point, I found myself all alone in this garden, and a voice spoke to me inside myself. I felt these words coming out saying, "None of this matters. The only thing that matters is love." And that had a profound effect on me.
At 7 years old, especially. Yeah. So what did you feel afterwards?
Well, from then on, I pursued love. I thought, well, love is obviously the most important thing. This was God speaking to me. God is love, and God has spoken to me. And so I must pursue love. And that was rather mad and foolish, but as a schoolgirl, boarding school, I was falling in and out of love. And, you got crushes on people. And then I had this headmistress who took me aside and when I was head girl and said, "Bronwen, this must stop. All these crushes must stop." And I called my prefects together and I told them this, and we thought, well, she's mad. How are we going to stop this? It's natural.
It is natural very much, yeah.
We then discovered that she herself was having an affair with one of the teachers. We didn't know all that at the time. But that was probably why she was against it all.
But there was still experiences happening, wasn't there, throughout your teens? You had suddenly had this feeling of there's no one there?
Yes, I could quite often have feelings of being at one with everything, and that I wasn't there, or that nobody else was there. It was a strange, really. I never knew when these feelings were going to come. And my school was in the mountains in Wales.
Right. And did it unsettle you?
No, it reassured me rather. I felt that God was still around, because I felt very attuned with mountains and streams, and we went for long walks as school children.
And could you talk to people about these experiences?
No, I never talked to anybody about it, no.
Yeah. So you kept it as your secret somehow?
That's right. I felt a bit foolish if I talked about it. Now, nobody else talked about anything that they'd had, but I assumed they did have these experiences, but we didn't talk about it, no.
I think it was also a time when, especially in England, you kept these things very much to yourself. Things are more open, aren't they, these days?
Absolutely, yes. You didn't talk about God at all in those days.
And were you going to church?
Well, at school, in this Welsh school, we went in Crocodile down the road to a Church of England Welsh church. It didn't mean much to me. In fact, we used to put blotting paper in our shoes in order to faint and be taken home.
Is that right? So when you left school, you became a teacher, I think, didn't you?
I went to drama school, yes. Central School of Speech and Drama, and became a teacher.
And how was that?
I got the sack quite soon.
And why?
Well, it was a mad school in Dorset, and I made a suggestion to the headmistress, and she wasn't going to stand for that. And on my plate, the next meal, my notice was given. But by the time I left, at the end of the year, I was one of the oldest members of the staff, because she was sacking people all the time. It didn't really matter in those days. You just went from one thing to another. I mean, there was plenty of work.
And then something important happened at the time. It was very difficult for you. Your best friend Erica was killed in an accident.
Yes, after drama school, my best friend fell out of a bus and was killed.
So she was standing. How did she fall out of the bus?
She had all her books in one hand, and it was a beetle bus when they didn't close the doors.
Right, yes.
And she put her hand up to stop the bus at a request stop. Bus went round a curve and she fell out.
Yes.
And I was devastated. It changed my life.
Mm. So can you explain how it changed your life?
Well, I'd lived through the war,
Yeah.
but no one I knew had died. This was the first experience of death.
Mm.
And I went to her cremation, her funeral, and as the coffin slowly slid out into and the doors closed behind it, there was this most awful yell in the church, and it was me, and I didn't realise I was yelling.
Mm. So it was a very deep grief you
terrible,
had.
Yes,
yeah.
terrible.
And you and her had this idea about being models together, didn't you?
Yes, we thought we were both quite tall. I mean, I'm still 5'10.5", and we thought, wouldn't it be fun to be models? We're talking about 1951, and we sent in little tiny photos to Vogue and to a competition. Of course, we got nowhere. We would never have been chosen. But when she died, I thought the first thing I wanted to do was to be a model and give up teaching. Her parents naturally wanted me to sit in her shoes and take her job, live in her flat and so on. And I said, no, I'm going to be a model girl. So I did. But it was difficult because I had a squint. So I first of all had have an operation on my eyes.
Yes.
Straighten my squint. And then when I was trained, the agent said, she agreed to train me, but she said, well, I can't put you on my books, you'll never get any work. You're too tall.
But you did get work, so what changed there?
I think I was just determined to do it. And so I lost a lot of weight. I look quite skinny. Nowadays you'd say I was anorexic, but I ate like a horse. But I lost a lot of weight so that I could get into the clothes. Even though I was too tall, I fitted the clothes size 12, 14.
And what was your first breakthrough as a model?
I just got a return ticket to Rome, and I went to Italy, and I found a photographer, and he thought I'd got the most marvellous coloured eyes, which in Italy you don't see people with green eyes. And so he gave me a lot of work, and then I did a few shows in the Palazzo Pitti in Florence, and I thought, well, I've made it pretty good. Came back to England, of course I got nothing. Had to start all over again.
And around this time, the spiritual side of you was emerging stronger, wasn't it? Because you discovered the books of Gurdjieff and Ouspensky, the Fourth Way,
Yes.
with Ouspensky. So what was this? What was this triggering these books? What was coming?
Well,
what were you connecting with in them?
After Erica's death, one of our tutors was L.A.G. Strong, and he took me out to dinner and he said, you must go inwards, you must journey inwards and find out what it is in you that Erica was fond of. She was your best friend. You think the world of her, but she found something in you, and you must find out what that is. So he directed me inwards, and that's what happened, I think. I began to read books about the inner journey.
And what did you start to discover about yourself? Do you remember?
Well, not really, but I was thrilled with Gurdjieff and Ouspensky's books. I don't remember now what it was all about, because I've moved on from there.
Yeah, I know one of the things we were talking earlier that's actually in Peter's book that you talk about at the time was that you discovered that there was all these different eyes inside you, these different voices. I think that was Gurdjieff was talking about that.
Yes, that spoke to me because as a child I used to think, gosh, I'm a different person at home from the person I am at school. And so when I read this book, that this was all right, this is quite normal, that there are different people inside you, that one moment you're like this and the next moment you're like that. So that was reassuring. So I was really intrigued by that, and that led me on more and more into the inner self, really.
Because you really had, I think, even at this early stage, these two sides of Bronwen. There was the extrovert
Yeah.
the model and was very social, and there was the more introvert that was very reflective and had a deepness about them.
Yes, I think that's true. I think I am both introvert and extrovert still.
Yeah. So on the modelling side, you actually became pretty famous, didn't you? I know you're playing
Yes.
it down a bit, but
Well, I did, yes, it's true. But in those days, there wasn't the publicity there is now. But yes, I went to Paris. I worked for Balmain, and that was great fun. And he was marvellous. And he used to call me his Garbo, which was very flattering.
yes, yeah,
But I mean, the people who bought my clothes were people like Marlene Dietrich, and so on. And I was dressed a lot of the time in big ball gowns and very, very lovely clothes he had.
and did you enjoy it?
Marvellous. I mean, the change from being a teacher, you didn't have to think, you see. You could just be yourself, or not even yourself. I used to forget who I was, and I put on these clothes because as a child I always loved dressing up. And so it was just fun to do. It was a very good, fun job.
I think also in the book it talks about at that point you also had this spiritual experience, we might call it, that you kind of felt you were walking alongside yourself along the catwalk.
Yes, I did. I felt sometimes I wasn't there. And yet I would be out on the catwalk with these clothes, and I mean, I can still feel it. I can still do it. I'm just not there. As I walk down the street sometimes, I'm just not there. And sometimes people come up to me and say, "Do I know you?" And I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm just smiling at everyone." I just sometimes have this smile on my face because I'm just not there.
Yeah, but what does not there mean to you these days? What does it mean?
Gosh, that's a difficult question. I think it means that you are very aware of everybody else, and you're quite unself-conscious.
So in fact, it's almost the opposite. You're very there. Something about you is very present.
Yes, you're in the now,
Yes.
but you're not aware of yourself. I think the experience I had later, it transcended the ego to a certain extent.
Yeah. Well, we'll come on to that a little bit later,
Yes.
because you were also there's lots of fascinating things about your history. I just want to cover firstly before we go maybe more deeply into how things are for you these days. But you were one of the first announcers on BBC.
Oh yes.
And it was just the one station, just BBC.
Yes.
And for 9 months you were announcing the programmes.
That's right. And there were no teleprinters or anything. You had to learn everything off by heart. And if you forgot, it was just too bad. You had got a script, but it wasn't sort of rolling in front of your eyes all the time.
They have it easy these days, really, don't they? Yeah.
And even models have it easy. I mean, they have their hair done, their makeup done. We had to do everything ourselves. And we did feel a bit more part of the thing, that we weren't sort of the automatons they are now. And it was the same on television. You had to learn the script before the programme began.
And also, again, in the book, it was saying that you had to answer all your own fan mail.
Yes. So, I remember people saying, "Who are you looking at?" Somebody wrote and said, "I don't know who you look at because you're always looking right above me or through me or something." I suppose it's partly because these funny eyes I have, they come out white sometimes on the television because there was no colour in those days. It was all black and white.
So the period on television was 9 months, and then the person that was the announcer came back, and you had to leave there and go back to modelling.
Sylvia Peters, yes.
Yeah, but something had changed for you about modelling, hadn't it? By this time, you weren't.
Had changed.
Yeah, you in the book it was saying that you weren't so enthralled by that world.
Right. Yes.
So you're kind of
I'm
interested.
detached.
Your interest in modelling was kind of drifting away a little bit.
Probably. Probably. I got a bit tired of it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
But how was it for you? Because you were a BBC announcer when there was only one station, so people were recognising you frequently.
Yes.
You were let's be honest, these days you would be called a supermodel because you were one of the most famous models in Britain at that time.
Mm-hmm.
How was it for you walking around and people recognising you?
Mm-hmm. Well, I quite enjoyed it. It was amusing. It was fun. It's quite a drug, you know, being famous. I can see why some people can't let it go. Perhaps I can't, I don't know. But it is a drug. You get used to it.
Yes.
You expect it.
Yeah.
In fact, if people don't recognise you, you're quite insulted.
Really?
Not now, but, you know, in those days you expect to be recognised. Yeah.
So it's you still had these two things running. You had this human side with the ego, and yet there was still this undercurrent of something growing in you that had a spiritual,
which I
a real spiritual depth.
Yes, and was more important.
Yes.
Somehow it was more important than the outer life.
Yeah. And you were in love with someone that wasn't really in love with you, it seemed.
That's right.
And that
I
was
fell
tough.
madly in love. And he told me afterwards that I was too impatient, that I didn't wait, because I was expecting him to propose, and so we were going out, and we were an item, as it's called now, and he didn't propose, and instead he went off on a holiday without me, and I was very upset. And because all this time I was pursuing love, or what I thought
which was the vision or the experience at 7 years old.
Yes, the instruction that love was the most important thing. So I was pursuing love. I now know, of course, it isn't the love that you want, it's the love that you give, because I hadn't got that far with my thinking. And I was still thinking it was the love that was being given to me that I was pursuing. So why was this man not interested in me? Here I was with everything. Top job, a top model, as you say, job, car, flat by that time, everything, money. And yet I wasn't being accepted to be loved.
Which is a very painful experience to have,
I felt
isn't it?
very, very rejected, and so I thought, you know, I was in a terrible state.
And one day you were looking out of your bedroom window, reflecting on this or feeling this. Just talk us through what happened then.
It was at night. I was going to bed, and this friend of mine, as I say, had gone away. And I was standing at my window, thinking about him, wondering where he was, what he was doing. And quite suddenly, the whole sky came towards me. As I stood there, it was most extraordinary. The whole world seemed to be moving. And it all came just the stars, the sky, everything just came towards me. It was very strange. So I thought, well, this is strange. And anyway, I went to bed in this state of mind of not knowing quite what was what. And thought, now I really must discover if God exists, because none of this makes sense. And so I lay in bed to go to sleep and played a game that I used to play with myself as a child, where you lose consciousness of your limbs. I started with my feet, couldn't feel them, up to my legs, couldn't feel them, straight up to my torso, couldn't feel it. And then when I got to about here, the neck, as a child, of course, I would go back into my body because it was frightening at that point. But that night, all right, I'm here, can't feel anything, I'll go on and let this unconsciousness take over my head. It was like throwing myself out of a psychological window. And I fell, I started falling. I thought, gosh, I'm killing myself, I'm dying, I'm going mad, I mean, you know, I'd just gone out of my head, as it were. And I found myself falling in a pitch-black tunnel. And as I fell, keeping myself very much together in bed, really like this, you know, as I fell, I could see a spot of light at the bottom that I was falling into. I thought, if I can just reach that light, I'll be all right. Because what was coming at me in the dark were all sorts of horrible, creepy, crawly things. It was.
But you could see these images, could you?
No, I could feel them.
You could feel them, yeah.
I just knew that something was trying to stop me getting to this light. And I was determined to get to this light.
And you got to the light?
I got to the light. I fell into the light, and it was an energy that came up through my feet, right up my body. Extraordinary energy, and I felt myself turning completely inside out. Most extraordinary feeling. At the same time, a sword was cutting me down this way in half. And I didn't know what was happening. I thought, well, now I am dying, definitely. This is the end. Anyway, in the end, it stopped and I went to sleep. I was exhausted, I just went to sleep. Then when I woke up in the morning, everything had changed. I no longer was obsessed by this man. It didn't matter that he'd gone away. I was completely changed. And I went to my bookshelf. I took out a book of Dylan Thomas's poems, which I'd never read before and didn't understand. And I could understand it all. I saw a book on Zen. I took it out. I understood it all. I thought, whatever's happened? This is amazing. I can understand things that I'd never understood before. And this wonderful feeling lasted for 3 weeks. And people said, good heavens, what's the matter with you? They thought I'd gone mad because I was in such a state of ecstasy and so happy. The world looked exactly the same. It wasn't as if things had changed outwardly at all. I didn't see everything suddenly wonderfully dazzling or coloured or something. My mind had changed. My whole attitude had changed. I changed from being any negative thoughts into being totally positive. And I felt completely linked to God. I thought, yes, God, you are love after all. This is love, this knowledge, this feeling of being understood and being loved. Now I understood what love was.
So looking back on it, what do you think actually happened? I don't mean the experience you've described that, but in a wider picture, what do you think actually happened?
I think it was the Holy Spirit. I think it was a self-surrender that I went through.
Yes.
Literally. And I think I was filled with the Holy Spirit. At least that's what I came to conclusion with afterwards, long afterwards.
And then, as you're saying, for 3 weeks, you felt like an ecstasy and excitement.
Yeah.
And then after that, it still stayed, didn't it, at one form, but it wasn't necessarily so dramatic.
No, exactly. But I still had this feeling in the solar plexus, to put it physically.
Yes. Yeah. I'm just reading the notes that I wrote from the book, and you describe it there as a feeling of being totally at one. You are not looking at it, you are part of it.
Yes.
So
I was part of everything.
Yes, yeah.
But I didn't, you often read of people having these experiences and seeing the world had changed. But to me, nothing had changed outwardly at all. But I had changed.
Then I think after that you started to explore Buddhism for a time.
Yes. As I say, I saw this book on Zen Buddhism and read it, and I thought, yes, that's what I am. I'm a Zen Buddhist. I live in the now, the present moment. And so I read quite a bit about Buddhism then, yes. I thought I must be a Buddhist. But fortunately, that didn't last long before I read a book reviewed by Huxley, by the Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, the Jesuit, and called The Phenomenon of Man. It's called something else now. And I bought that, and I realised that's all right, I'm a Christian.
So what was it in that book then that gave you that realisation?
Well, Teilhard was a mystic. Also, he'd had a direct experience of God, like I think I had. And at the same time, he believed in evolution and how you evolve into this, and why love is the most important thing. For him, the whole church and everything about Christianity is about love. And it all made sense. So I started reading him.
Right. And it's interesting because around this time, I think you also started to date Bill Astor, who was Lord Astor. You had, I think, your first dinner with him.
Yes, well, he was told to go to what happened was I'd done a fashion show in St. Moritz, and some friends of his had come. He had only just arrived, and so he hadn't come to this fashion show. But he had lunch with these friends the next day who told him that they'd been to this fashion show, and there was this crazy girl. In fact, the whole show was crazy.
Yeah.
And there was this crazy girl that made them all laugh. And of course that appealed to Bill at once. So he asked for who was it, and it was me. And because we just fooled about on this fashion show. And he rang me up a few weeks later. I was shocked, and I put the phone down.
You put the phone down on him?
I put the phone down on him. Well, yes, because then he rang again,
Yeah.
and I said, "But we haven't been introduced." Well, that's how I was brought up.
Yeah, yeah.
And eventually he tried a third time. By that time, he himself had pulled himself together to ring me again, because he got on his white tie and tails. He'd been to some show, some do. And he was losing courage for this girl who kept putting the phone down on him. And by the third time, I thought, gosh, I can't put this man off. So I agreed to have lunch with him. And I carefully made an appointment for after lunch to get away. But when I did go and have lunch, he was so amusing, such fun, no threat at all. And he asked me out to dinner later.
It's interesting how persistent he was, in the same way that you had that same persistence to pursue your modelling career. You obviously both had a deep determination.
Well, of course, Bill was a very spiritual person. He had a great faith.
So he proposed to you, didn't he, fairly early on in your relationship, which
Much
was
too early.
quite a shock
shocked,
for you.
Yeah, I was shocked.
Yeah. So you turned him down again?
No, of course not.
No.
No.
So what happened
no.
exactly?
Well, because my experience with God taught me that you don't say no to love. And the fact that he'd fallen in love with me meant that I had to respond positively. Otherwise, you're saying no to God. You can't do that.
So you took it as a sign, really?
Absolutely. And then that night, I lay on the floor, banging my fist on the floor, saying, no, 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 not this, not this. Because I didn't want to marry somebody who was already married. And twice he'd had 2 wives.
Yeah.
And still married. And much older than me, and I didn't fancy it at all. Besides, I didn't understand his life.
Because he lived in a big property with many servants and...
Yes, something I wasn't used to at all.
Yeah.
And I thought, no, this isn't what I want. I would much rather a penniless artist. As it turned out, he was quite good at art. Our favourite ways of spending holidays was for him to go painting. So I always enjoyed that sort of side of his life. But at the same time, saying no, 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 it was very much, not my will but yours, God, as Jesus said. And he persisted, so I married him.
And it was a huge change in your life because, as you say, you came from a good background, but a very different background in terms of...
Yes, my father was a professional lawyer.
Yeah.
I mean, we had a cook or a gardener, but we didn't have large house or servants or anything.
Yeah. And how was that going into that huge change in life? And you had dinner parties many nights and all these servants and...
Yes. Well, I had to keep my spiritual life going to cope with it. My strength was my faith, and I went to church. In fact, we had a lovely church nearby, near Clifton, lovely priest. And I found my strength in that and in reading the Bible and in prayer.
And Teha was a great spiritual support for you too, wasn't he?
Reading Teha.
Yeah.
And the Bill was a bit worried because he thought this was another Mary Baker Eddy. He'd been brought up as a as a Christian Scientist.
Right.
And he was worried that I'd discovered something like that.
So, and again, you had the 2 sides of you, the outward side and the inward side, and
Yes.
somehow you had to keep them balanced, didn't you?
That's right.
And then when I think it was your daughter Janet was born, you had a vision, which is quite interesting vision, which confirms something.
I did. I was I had my daughter in my own bedroom at Clifton, and just after she was born, I looked over in the corner of the room, and there was a group of angels, tiny little cherubic, beautifully coloured angels going up and down, like going up and down a ladder. And they were looking at me with great compassion and love. And I got the message again, rather like the message when I was very young. You must remember that life is sacrificing yourself. Self-sacrifice is the key to life. And I was absolutely devastated. In fact, after that, Bill thought I was suffering from
postnatal depression.
Exactly, because I was in tears, because I had felt I had deprived my daughter of some grace, at resisting, because she had to be pulled out with forceps. You know, I couldn't relax to give birth, and I felt I'd done something terrible, that I wasn't sacrificing myself to give birth.
And then there was a whole series of events unfolding which really tested your strength, what became known as the Profumo affair. Stephen Ward, many people would know this of a certain age. And Bill really had a difficult time, and you had a very difficult time. And your faith became very important, didn't it?
Yes, and his. He was interviewed several times by the police and used to come out of the room completely white. And he went off to our local bishop, who strengthened his will to remain completely silent about it all, which was misinterpreted, because in fact he had paid a lot of money to defend Stephen, and Stephen didn't ever acknowledge that publicly. But he was, accused of ignoring his friend and so on, but he didn't, quite the opposite.
Yes, I think for both of you, it needed this tremendous strength. And again, it says in the book that you were praying every night before you went to bed, praying for this
together,
strength.
Yes, we were both on our knees on our bed.
Yeah.
We shared. You see, Bill being a very spiritual person, we shared this faith. And there was a time when he felt he couldn't carry on. And that's when I rang up my father and said, he's going to go to America, he's going to run away. My father came down to Cliveden that night, straight away, to help. And Bill stayed, and we staggered on. But it was a nightmare.
And it actually ended up bringing down the Conservative government, didn't it?
Well, so they said,
yeah.
But I don't know, it's a bit dramatic.
So after that, Bill's health deteriorated quite dramatically.
Yes, he had a bad heart anyway.
And he died. You'd only been married 5 years.
That's right.
So much had happened. You had such a depth of connection.
And we got 2 little children.
Yes, yeah.
Which I'm in spite of everything, I managed to produce 2 children, 2 lovely daughters.
Yes, yeah.
And yes, we crammed a lot into 5 years. But my faith carried me through. I survived, but he didn't.
Yes.
Yes, he had a weak heart.
Yeah. So when you were again on your own with your daughters, how was that to start with? Because you came out of that high profile with all the servants to living in a much more simple way again, didn't you?
Yes, well, my in-laws insisted that Cliveden must go back to it belonged to the National Trust, and that we must leave. And I only had a small cottage to go to begin with. I had a house in London. We lived in this tiny cottage for a few months while I looked for somewhere to live. And I found a place near Godalming, near Guildford, and with the help of my brother-in-law, not, I must say, my husband's brothers, but my sister's husband. And we moved there. 1966 it was. Well, I moved there in 67, yes.
And then you decided to become a Catholic, to convert to becoming a Catholic, didn't you?
Well, yes, it was the friends I made then. I met up with, because I had this monk, Dom Robert, who lived near us at Cliveden, who had exorcised Cliveden for us while Bill was very ill. I had gone to him and said, can you do something about the house? The atmosphere's wrong. And he came and exorcised the house. and it all went out through me. Well, when I say that, I got to feel very ill as we went round the house, and he looked at me in astonishment and said, "Oh dear, you'd better go and lie down." And
So you felt these
yes,
spirits going through you? Or?
yes, you see,
Really?
he was going through the house, exorcising it, you know, salt and all the things you do, and I was following along with him. And I gradually got a terrible sore throat and headache, felt very ill. And he said, "Oh, I didn't realise it would go out through you." And so I went to bed, and I thought I was a bit worried because we got people coming to dinner, and I went fast asleep. When I woke up, I felt perfectly all right. And I sort of floated downstairs. Again, it was a very strange sort of physical thing which I remember doing. Floated downstairs, greeted my guests, and one of them, who was very much a hunting, shooting, fishing fellow, said, "Oh, Bronwen, what have you done? Moved the pictures round?" And I said, "No, nothing happened. I've just had the house exorcised." And he said, "But it's completely different." That was very strange.
And also, I think shortly after that, you discovered you had healing powers.
Yes, I think that, well, that came with meeting up with these Pentecostal friends and starting the Catholic charismatic movement in England. Well, there was a whole lot that started up in Yorkshire with, I can't remember his name, a priest anyway, was started up in Yorkshire. And we started down in Godalming, and we had prayer meetings where we spoke in tongues and laid hands on people and prayed every Friday night.
So did quite dramatic healings happen at these meetings?
Oh yes, oh yes. I remember one person I laid my hands on and he said, "Take your hands off, they're burning." He'd had an ulcer. I think it was cured.
So what did you feel about that? It's quite dramatic, isn't it, to
Well,
lay your
yes.
hands on somebody and they get a healing.
It was exciting times, I must say. And but after a bit, I got a bit bored with this, and I thought, no, this isn't using my mind at all. This is mindless stuff. And I went off to train as a psychotherapist, which did me a lot of good because I used my mind for the first time.
But before that, you were involved in a whole community, weren't you?
We started that prayer meeting, gathered round a lot of people who came and lived in our house, and I bought the house next door by throwing a medal into the garden, and the house came on the market.
You threw a medal into the garden?
Oh yes, well, my Catholic friends suggested that if we wanted the house next door, which was for sale,
Yes.
you throw a medal into the garden. And so it was a medal of Virgin Mary, you know, so
Okay.
I threw a medal into the garden, and the owners reduced their price and offered me the house, and I bought it. And that's how we started a community of charismatic people.
But it was also quite controversial, this community at times, wasn't it?
Well, the poor parish priest didn't know what had happened. Yes.
So tell us a bit more about that. Why was the controversy?
Well, it was that we were attracting all sorts of young priests, young seminarians, and we were holding these charismatic prayer meetings every week, and some of them were leaving the priesthood as a result. It wasn't a good idea at all. But you can't control the Holy Spirit.
So when you say you can't control the Holy Spirit, what does that mean?
Well, I think it means that there is an energy, a power that is beyond us, that is both inside and outside of us, both inner and outer. And I think that's what integrated me, realizing that this power, this energy, exists both inside you and outside you. And it has a will of its own. It does what it wants. But it's motivated by love. Love is the greatest energy there is.
And you keep coming back to that, don't you? This base of love.
Love, which is a vibration and
Yeah.
a certain frequency, which I think is changing at this present moment as we speak. Something's going on.
So talk more about that.
Well, I don't really know what I'm talking about.
Well, but you obviously have a feeling. And
I have a feeling that things are changing, yes. And that the frequency and vibration is changing in the universe. I think some of this climate change is indicative of that.
Well, one of the things that you also, again, it's in the book, that was happening in the community, you were having hermits come and stay on the grounds, and some of them stayed as long as 7 years.
Yes, yes.
You gave them that space just to be quiet and on their own. When
the community finished, yes, and I still had this house that was empty, and grounds, quite considerable grounds. Yes, I had a nun in the flat above the chapel, because I turned a garage into a chapel, so we had our own chapel. And I had a monk in the woods, in a hut that I bought specially from Loseley. And I had one or two others, one in a caravan. And they kept up a prayer life which was very strong.
And I guess you had a real affinity with them?
Mm-hmm, yes, and you had to have plenty of time to spare, because when you went to talk to them, as they hadn't talked to anyone all day, they kept you there for hours, so you had to have plenty of time if you visited them.
Yeah.
Yes, a lovely group of people.
Yeah. So in the end with the community, what was the kind of the factors that meant that...
Well, I then had a strange person who came to cook for me, who actually was a psychopath. And it was a disaster. And she said, you know, really, this community is a complete waste of time. You should be in London. You should sell up all this. And by that time, my two daughters, who'd been to university, were married and had their own lives. And so I decided that this woman wasn't going to stay with me, because she was a bit peculiar, and I would go to London. So I sold up and went to live in London in 2002.
And as you mentioned, you'd done the psychotherapy training, and I think that again, it's in the book, that there was a great value of that for you, because it brought together two sides, the side of the human with the spiritual somehow. It helps you integrate things.
Well, it did, so much so that when I moved to London, I decided to give up being a psychotherapist and trained in spiritual direction, because the soul, by that time the soul had become more interesting to me than the ego. So I now describe myself as a spiritual guide.
Yes.
But the psychotherapy comes in useful.
And so when you say the soul, what does that mean?
What does it mean, indeed? I can hardly describe it.
What does it mean to you, though?
Well, that which is going to survive death, the immortal part of you, which has always been with you all your life and belongs to God, that of which of you is linked to God, really, and is immortal, and contains your consciousness, I think.
And what does God mean for you?
God means love, vibration, energy, power, life, really.
So you basically see God in everything.
Yes, I see God in everybody. I react to the God in everybody, because when you meet somebody who is anti-God, you know at once. You have no connection. But you talk to God in that other person. I mean, I feel when I'm talking to somebody, I'm talking to God. And do you feel there's people that don't have God, are completely devoid of God? Oh, I feel it. I feel it. I feel the coldness. I feel the misunderstanding, the blankness. Yes.
But is it something that just isn't there, or is it's dormant?
Well, it's sometimes quite aggressive and dangerous. I don't think it's that which isn't there. I know that the church defines, I don't quite know what it is, but something when God isn't present, but I think God is always present. But there is an anti-God. There is definitely a devil.
Because you see, from my perspective, it's hard to understand what the devil is.
Yes.
So tell me, I'm interested in this. Tell me more about...
I think it's an anti-force. It's another sort of force which isn't love. It's a divisive force, whereas love unites.
But isn't it more to do with ignorance, really, the devil, rather than something that is actually evil?
No, I
No.
think it's no. I don't
So
think
you
it's
see this
ignorance.
polarization of
Yeah.
love and God and the devil and evil.
Yes, and then
Yeah.
and the devil's not ignorant. The devil's very clever, sinister, clever, and you can feel it as coldness. I mean, before I had lived and exorcised, there were rooms which were cold, even though the heating was on. There were parts of the staircase up the back side of the back of the house which were cold. And I don't say that's the devil, but that is where God isn't. So it's a definite change in the temperature.
Yeah, it's interesting because I support this organisation called the Phoenix Prison Trust, and what they do
me
is
too.
okay. And as you know, you know about Bolozov. Do you?
Yes.
Yes.
I met him.
Yes. Well, I've met him as well.
Lovely man.
And what I've mentioned this before on Conscious TV. His book, We're All Doing Time.
We're all doing time. Yes.
And there you have a book, and it's basically the heart of it, if you like, is this correspondence with prisoners, his letters back and forth.
Yes.
And he basically corresponds without judgment with these prisoners.
Yes.
And some of these guys have been, I would have thought, in your eyes, would be like the devil. They've murdered a lot of people in cold blood.
Sure.
And yet Bo is able to somehow draw another side of them out.
Yeah.
And it's as if something starts to blossom and open. And I would say, in my terms, God appears.
Yes. Why not? God will be there.
Yes.
But maybe hidden.
Well, that's what I was saying earlier. You know, is God dormant somehow?
Oh, I see what you mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But then the devil has got in charge of that person.
So you would say the devil. I would say it's ignorance, but I understand what you're saying.
Well,
yeah.
I think the devil has an energy, you see.
Yeah.
So that's why I would say he's not ignorance.
Yeah. It's very interesting how there's this point where people change, they wake up. It's like someone else who sat on this settee a year or two ago was Benjamin Zephaniah, who I actually met through the trust, and he's an ex-prisoner. He's Rastafarian. He was in prison, and then he was saying that there's one day that he then got very involved with gangs, and he was sleeping with a gun underneath his pillow at night. And there was one morning when he woke up, and he remembered what his teacher said to him at school. He said, Benjamin, one day you're either going to be in prison or you're going to die. And he thought, well, I've already been in prison. I haven't died yet. But he remembered this. And when he woke up, something so significant happened. He lost everything. And he didn't even bother to collect the money he was owed through selling drugs or whatever. He left everything and moved to London, became a poet. And I just think it's so fascinating how different people, they have their awakening experiences in completely different ways. And you had yours as looking out the window. Him, he just woke up from his sleep and woke up from another sleep at the same time, if you like. And I don't know, I'm a great believer that there's another very good example of I've been trying to get them on Conscious TV. I can't even remember their full names, but there's a woman called Jo, and her father was killed in the Brighton bombings then. And it was when the IRA blew up the hotel in Brighton where the Conservative Party was staying. And she's now doing talks with the guy from the IRA who planted the bomb.
Gosh.
Which killed her father, and I'm trying to get them on Conscious TV. They're doing talks together. It's that kind of act of forgiveness and compassion and realizing that somehow you've been in the dark and the light begins to come. And I'm a great believer that's always there in people.
Oh, it must be.
God is always there.
God is always there, of course. It must be, because in the Bible it always says, the devil is also always there.
Right. Okay. I think we have to agree to disagree on.
I think God has invented the devil.
Yeah. So one of the things you told me earlier was that you feel you're permanently awake.
I feel permanently awake.
So what does that mean practically?
I feel permanently linked to God. And
Yes.
God is awake. God is the now.
Yes.
God is in everything and is consciousness, or whatever you like to call it, energy, whatever you like to call it. And I feel linked to that permanently.
And are there things that you still do in life that you look back afterwards and think, well, God wasn't fully present when I did that? Or do you feel he's so ever present that you're doing everything from a, let's say, a godly place?
Well, of course, I mean, I'm become unconscious from time to time. If I'm shopping or something like that, I'm not aware of God. But I am in a state of prayer most of the time.
Mm.
And if I'm not doing the talking, I'm praying.
And you're praying by repeating a prayer, or it's just something that's happening kind of automatically?
It's automatic, really. It's also a physical thing. It's a feeling that is, as I say, at the solar plexus, and it's a self what's the word, concentration. You just recollect yourself, and you just become conscious where you are and who you are, and that you're linked to God. So you recollect it's a recollecting all the time.
And that's something, again, on Conscious TV, we talk about quite a lot, is being present.
Yes.
And that's your way of being present, isn't it?
Yes, my way of being present.
Yeah. And somehow it's a great, as you've found in your life, it's just such a great resource when...
Yes, but it does create an opposition, because a lot of people don't like it.
So how does that emerge for you?
I rather, to go back to the Profumo thing, I rather think that was opposition, because Stephen Ward, who used to come a lot to Cliveden, I would go like this, you know, and he came into the room. And I feel that I created an opposition, not that I was responsible for what happened, but you do, rather, if you're like a boat going rather fast through water, you create sort of bow waves.
Everything has a repercussion somehow.
Yes,
yeah.
And I think sometimes I come over a bit too strong, and people can't take it.
Well, it's brave of you to admit that.
Well, I don't know. I think it happens. Yes.
So, Bronwen, we need to finish.
Yes.
It's been fascinating. I appreciate your honesty.
And my humour, I hope.
And your humour. Yeah.
Thank you.
You've really lived a life, and I admire that. And,
well, I'm 80, and I hope I'm still got life to live.
You're very alive for 80, and you were telling me earlier that you were even on the... you were doing a little fashion show last weekend at Goodwood, weren't you?
I've been back on the catwalk after 50 years, yes. I enjoyed it.
80 years old on the catwalk is quite something, yeah.
Yes, and I was asked, do you still wear high heels? I said, oh, yes. They were afraid I might still only be in flatties, but as it did happen, when I did a turn, I nearly fell over, I must say. But it was fun.
Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, everyone, again for watching Conscious TV, and I hope we see you again soon. Goodbye.